Hi, my name is Animesh Daryani. I'm a 25-year-old guy living in Manchester, UK. And the thing which I love most, second most thing which I love, is trying to understand the world at large and, create these mental models in terms of how the world works and how, you know, all the things in the world come together to make certain events happen. And one of these events which I absolutely love is financial crisis. Now, I'm not a sadist who likes financial crisis because I do understand there is human cost to it. But looking back, I'm deeply fascinated when I hear about 2008 financial crisis. I have read so many things about 2008 financial crisis or 2000 .com bubble or 1987 a short crash that happened. And now I've been reading about 1929, a book by Andrew Ross Sorkin. It's about Great Depression. And when people think about financial crises, people think about policy, people think about bank rates, people think about how Federal Reserve, what it did, what it did not do, but the bigger point is, I feel, financial crisis is not about numbers, it's about the story, it's about the fundamental psychology of human being. And since I'm a little bit more of an optimistic person, I feel, financial crisis basically, like even 1929 signals this sort of fallacy in us as human beings is we we can always be hyper optimistic about new technologies, about and that is the good thing about civilization, human species. Throw us in, like, darkest times, and there's always, like, I'm pretty sure we as humans are very hopeful, and we always eventually, we are very resilient, we always figure out a way to be hopeful. And this crash is basically what happens when everybody gets really hopeful about becoming rich, and then when then on a random Tuesday, uh, you know gravity starts to show its effect. And yeah, people notice that ultimately, the era of exuberance, the era of, oh my god, we all are going to be rich, usually doesn't end well, and certainly, in this case, hasn't end well. And without giving you more lectures, I want to straight dive into this book. So 1920s America was a very prosperous place. People were feeling better as people were getting richer. There were new things like dishwashers and cars that were becoming more, that were making people's life more easier, and people were in good mood in general because they were getting richer. And 1920s America, car company General Motors basically did this thing where they were doing buy now pay later schemes. Klarna rings a bell. But basically, they were doing these buy now pay later things, and borrowing money, and like buying things by borrowing money was considered taboo in 1920s, but it was becoming more mainstream as sort of everybody started doing it, and the access to credit become, or access to loans became more popular. And Wall Street just saw this and they were like, yes, we will extend this logic to stocks. So a lot of Wall Street bankers, we will talk about Charles Mitchell, which was called Sunshine Charlie, a very charismatic, um, popular, optimistic guy, who thought, it's gonna be, golden days forever. He was actually head of National Bank, and he basically, helped people to buy stock. So at start of the decade, it the net loan that company was giving to everybody to buy stock was $1 billion. By the mid of the decade, under uh, Charlie Michel, it became about $6 billion. So you can imagine, like, six folding the leverage, and people were just borrowing to bet on stock market. Now it was a very good, on paper it's like you can borrow 10x of your base amount. So for example, if you are you put $10, buy a stock of $100. Stock is volatile, stock goes up to 140, you sell it and you cash out 30, 40, $50. And then the people who were doing it were sounding very smart, and the people who were conscious enough to not do it were sounding dumb, because it's very hard when when people make money and you are not, because you think something, but they are making cold hard cash. So um there's very interesting story where there is this person called Gochano. He His stockbroker basically calls him and he says this particular stock is going up and you should buy it, and this guy basically says, like, I'm not sure, blah blah blah. And like, the earnings are not matching up, how this stock can grow so much. And this guy basically, Gochwanmo, basically says to his stockbroker, like, I can't understand this. And his stockbroker says, even I don't understand this, and it's beyond us, but it is gonna grow. And yes, then they basically bet on the stock, and this guy loses a lot of money on this. And this guy was somebody who was very rational, but because of his stockbroker he lost money. So that there were instances where people lost a lot of money, but overall the mood of the market was pretty good at start of 1920s, because there were people, including big bankers. uh, there was this guy called Jacob, Jacob Raskov. He was a industrialist as well. He had this saying, "Everybody ought to be rich," and when there was this big delusion of everybody got to be rich, people started investing, speculating in stock market, and this is how 1920s, the start of 1920s was happening. In 1920s America, radio was the most important technology out there. And there was this company called RCA. And this will actually, like, give you a lot of flashbacks when it comes to SpaceX. So people were not buying the company, okay, people were buying the future, that is radio and communications. So basically, there was this, in March of 1929, there was a floor trader named Michael Meehan, who basically sent a confidential memo to his, like, eight or nine, like, wealthy friends, and they were like, okay, he was like, give me enough money, we will trade RCA stock between each other. So they made what you called, like, a pool. It's called, like, basically a pool of money where investors trade RCA stock with each other. And because of this trading, they will sort of increase the price artificially. And as people will notice the share price is going up, people become more interested. And this was essentially a pump and dump. And then all of the early investors, whatever his friends were of Michael Meehan, all of them sold their RCA stock at a like much premium price. And back in those days, like today, it's like illegal, now it's regulated, but back in those days, this like investor pool strategy was very common. Rich people like Mr. There was a guy called Mr. Durand. He and there was Mr. Raskov. uh, all of them were basically doing this, like, sort of trading and, like, sort of pump and dump essentially. And back in those days, that was completely legal, and they were able to get away with it. But this also shows you this whole idea of doing an IPO of, like, $1 trillion company, and, like, how these things are not new. Like, new technologies just come and people become hyper excited about it, and then there are people who are more of an insider than outsiders, and then you will see sort of like gravity playing out, and the share prices go down. But of course, by the late 1929, by October of 1929, uh, there was a Black Monday where share prices a lot of companies started rapidly falling, and there was a panic sellout, um, and this guy called Richard Whitney, who was part of the J.P. Morgan House of Morgan group, essentially. Um, since a lot of them were invested in markets, and a general drawdown, like when share prices falls, like when share prices fall, it's not just one company that's gonna get affected. So a lot of these extremely wealthy people figured out that a crazy, like a bear market where like there is a massive correction is not in their favor, as a lot of them were leveraged on it. They, if the market goes down by 20, 30, 40%, they could face bankruptcies, or the deals can fall apart. For example, Mr. Mr. The head of the National City Bank, Mr. Mitchell, actually was planning to buy a corn exchange. For that, he proposed that acquisition by using National Cities share stock. So it was all stock exchange. But if the share price was falling like this, and the deal was made at $240 a share. So before he made the deal, the share was at like 280. It was very comfortable in its position. But since markets started falling, the Citibank stock went below $200 a share. And then, of course, there was a saga where Michel borrowed a lot of money from JP Morgan to buy his own company stock, which could have easily made him bankrupt. And this story will further continue. But for now, as you will see, there were like a lot of rich people who were very much invested in the market, and they don't want the market to go down. And they will do whatever it takes for that. So you will see Mr. Durand, which is one of the characters in the story, actually goes to meet President Hoover. And President Hoover was more of a pragmatic man who does not like, he did not believe that, okay, he was like, okay, this is a market's problem, and let the markets like deal with this, and let the government not intervene. But since Federal Reserve was increasing interest rates, the market was cooling down, and President Hoover was like, I'm not gonna intervene because of the share prices are falling. uh, but largely every rich person, so this Richard Whitney, who was part of House of Morgan, actually on this fateful Black Thursday, um, actually went around and started buying, like, stock of all the companies. So he bought American Steel. He bought a lot of variety of stock, and he spent like $20 million buying stock, because since stock was falling, he made this bet that if I infuse a lot of capital, and of course Richard Whitney was just the face of it. It was House of Morgan, um, that was sort of pooled a lot of money. Apart from House of Morgan, there were other banks and rich people who actually pooled this 20 million dollars. But the Richard Whitney was the guy who went in the Wall Street, like, trading floor, and went ahead and bought these stocks. And for that particular day, he was considered White Knight, because while everybody was selling, he was the one who was buying and sort of calming the market down. But like, counter to their own understanding, this did not last, and of course there was a sell off in market again. So as people think, like, 1929 was not a tragedy of one day. It was not like on a one fateful day market went down and everybody, like, like, of course there were people who suffered and there was genuine economic distress, but that distress was not out of result of one specific day. It was more that, a series of, like, days. It was like a slow, painful, um you know air coming out of tube, or it was a slow and steady decline of stock market. And people increasingly became more skeptical of markets, and at because a generation after 1929 did not invest it. And this is such a interesting thing, because there was no war. There was like nobody who technically died because of a gunshot, or there were no bombs dropped. But the but America at large was feeling the pain of this economic, you know distress. And that was one of the very interesting part of 1929. And as the market kept going down, at start President Hoover was like, this is a basic regional thing. It will stop. It is basic correction. Some people said it's a distressed sale, so it's not a like a permanent thing. It's gonna recover. But eventually it did not. It became the new normal, and the stock market corrected, and the unemployment went up. um, and not because of stock market's importance, but I think the nature of stock market was like people were borrowing, so people borrowed a lot of money. The capital that could have been used for genuine economic activity went towards speculation. And that's where Senator Glass actually stepped in. And Of course, he was a human being with his flaws. So Glass did not wanted to regulate the whole industry. He wanted the regulations to be pretty, pretty like decent, but he did not wanted the investment arms of the banks to be separated with the deposit side of things. But eventually, in deliberations, the country and the parliament decided, the U.S. Lawmakers decided that this is the right thing to do. And there was Senator Stegall. So both of them wrote. Senator Stegall was the guy who proposed this fundamental thing that if the bank deposit should be insured by the U.S. government, which still is the law. And Of course, like, these insurance are done by big banks, and every bank contributes to a central fund that is responsible for m- this um, this assurance. But this idea that your money would be secured by US government, so even if there is a bank run, the US government will back your money, and it will not that actually helped a lot of people in the midwestern and the rural side of US. So this actually thing by Stegall, actually Senator Stegall, created a lot of political support, which was very essential for President Hoover, as stock market started calling this recession thing as Hoover market. And the places where unemployed people used to live were called Hoover villages or Hoovervilles. And I don't think President Hoover was like did a terrible job of, like, President Hoover was doing what he thought was the right thing to do at that moment. And, like, again, the idea of rugged individualism, the idea of free markets, basically suggests, like, let the market be. And There was this scene where President Roosevelt, so Hoover lost the election, and then Roosevelt stepped in, and the the great thing with Roosevelt was, as soon as he stepped in, the crisis had already happened. So now Roosevelt had the political backing and the right circumstances to start the reforms. He under his watch, Glass-Steagall Act actually became a reality. After the crash, the mood of the nation was extremely bitter towards the bankers, as they were seen culprits of a lot of the misery that was being, that was being suffered by regular Americans. And as to me, 1929 is not about institutional failure or people, people's greed or unlawful behavior. 1929 to me fundamentally tells a story of human optimism and exuberance. And basically, behind every crisis, there is one thing that sort of like is the reason for the whole crisis, and that is debt. um, because when people assume that tomorrow is going to be substantially more prosperous than today, then they borrow. If people are hyper optimistic, they want to bring tomorrow's prosperity to today. That is what essentially debt is, that you assume that your future is going to be more prosperous than today, and that is why you're willing to borrow from yourself, from future you, so that you can enjoy or use the resources for today you. But and that's essentially not a bad thing. But at what point we as humans go delusional enough to believe that, oh my god, everybody's gonna be rich, and this is what happened. Like, this has happened in 2000, where everybody thought all the dot-com companies will become very, useful and will create a lot of revenues. um this is what happened in 2008, where people assume that property prices will keep going forever and there will be no defaults, and the incentives of the the credit rating companies were not aligned toward their duty. And this is what in my opinion is happening now, because now we have a company that is worth like more than $1 trillion, and which has a thing called grok that eats a lot of its revenue. I have no doubt about the scientific importance of the innovation which SpaceX has done. But if we be real about numbers and the cash flows and the profits, because ultimately the whole idea of buying a stock is essentially, can you make the can it deliver the profits back to you? That's the whole idea of investing. So 1929 for me is about humans. It's humans being humans. It's how we as individuals, we as country, um, become this very interesting people who get delusional, who do things which are irrational, and then we face the music. And as in front of the book, there is this line by Albert Einstein, and I want to read it. The only the ordinary human being does not live long enough to draw any substantial benefit from his own experience, and no one, it seems, learn from experience of others. Being both a father and a teacher, I know we can teach our children nothing. Each must learn its lesson anew. That's Albert Einstein in the middle of depression, on 26th of October 1929. And it was a very fantastic book written by um, Mr. Andrew Ross Sorkin. And I love his his program. And thank you for listening to me. Thanks a lot.